Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest in the long line of BrightGen release webinars, this time on the subject of the Spring 24 release of Salesforce. I'm Kev Alden, also known as Bob Buzzard in the community. I'm your host as usual, and I'm coming to you live today from our offices in the Bankside building in London, which is slightly unusual, so let's hope everything holds up for me. Welcome to the, we've got a few new names in here today that I don't recognise, so welcome everyone who's joining for their first one. Hope that's useful. So without further ado, there's a few people trickling in more at the moment, but by the time we've done the agenda, etc., I'm sure they'll pick up the thread. Okay, so here is our agenda of what we're going to cover today. This is exactly the same agenda as it's been for the last 3 or 4 webinars, so I won't sit here and read it out to you. We'll just crack on with the interesting stuff. So as usual, we're starting with fond farewells. Basically features that have served us well, but they've reached the end of their useful life and they're on the way. All of these images you see on these kind of separator pages, by the way, all generated by DALL-E 3. Based on prompts that I supplied to it. So this is everyone waving off a ship full of people. I still think it's remarkable how well it can draw things based on a few words from me. So the first thing that's retiring is the ANT migration tool. So I think this tool's been around longer than I have, which shows its age, but it's really been on the sidelines for quite some time now that the Salesforce CLI is here. And it won't be receiving any more love. So it will still work, but it won't be updated or supported. So you can continue to use it, but if you hit problems, you'll be on your own. You really should switch to the Salesforce CLI. It's much easier to use than running ANT type builds to do deployments, etc. But if you still love it, then nobody's going to stop you from doing that. Meeting Studio is also being retired as of this release. This is, for those who haven't used it, this is something that Salesforce quickly put together in response to COVID. To allow kind of combinations of video call with capturing notes, etc. But obviously now the world has moved on, they clearly don't see any reason to try and compete against the likes of Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, Zoom, etc. Note that this one is a full retirement, so you won't be able to access Meeting Studio once Spring 24 goes live, even if you decide you want to do it at your own risk. Inbox Mobile retired a couple of days ago, so if you were trying to use it and you're having problems, that explains why. At the moment, there really isn't a replacement for this. The advice is just to use Gmail or Outlook integration on the desktop and the Salesforce mobile app to access records on your device. And Salesforce for Outlook, that's retiring in June 2024, not long now, mere 4 months away. So I'll be honest before we notice. So the advice here is to move to the Outlook integration and Einstein activity capture, and you'll get an improved experience rather than just parity. The streaming API versions 23 through 36 are retiring in winter 25. Winter 25 sounds like an awful long time away, but it's actually October, so sort of 8 months or so to update to a later version. And one of the most disappointing for me, Salesforce functions are retiring in just under a year. They look like a really interesting new feature, but clearly didn't pan out as everyone hoped. So the advice now is to recreate using a platform like Heroku, but obviously you have to manage, authentication, integrations, etc. yourself. And looking a little bit further out, API versions 21 through 30 are retiring in summer 25. This was originally scheduled for summer 23, but it got pushed back a couple of years to give everyone a bit more time to upgrade their integrations. Again, summer 2025 sounds like an awful long time away, but it's only 16 months. And you know how long IT projects can take. So if you have anything that's relying on those API versions, you probably want to get to work on them as soon as you can. Next up, we have some general changes. So here's the standard browser support slide. Doesn't really change these days. It's the latest Edge Chromium, Chrome, Firefox, and Safari for most applications, with the caveat that Classic Console doesn't support Safari, and Lightning experience on the iPad, unsurprisingly, is Safari only. Some more general changes. There's a new setup domain coming that impacts both Classic and Lightning experience for all editions. So this will be applied to orgs on a rolling basis, so you might not necessarily see this immediately that you go live on Spring 24, but if you use allow lists, then you're going to have to allow access to everything from star salesforcesetup.com. Multi-factor authentication. This has been slightly rolled back, so admins will see in-app notifications about multi-factor authentication if a setting to require MFA for direct UI logins is disabled, and that will tell them that their org isn't compliant with contractual requirements. So this was actually going to be enforced in Spring 24, but apparently the take-up has been very high, so well done everyone. And they don't feel the need to carry out that enforcement. So clearly we all recognise that MFA makes things more secure. Note that if you purchase another production org, going forward, MFA will be enabled by default. And then a change that surprises nobody, well, the only surprise is that it's taken this long. The original marketing application has been renamed Marketing CRM Classic to differentiate it from Salesforce Marketing Cloud, if you're still using that. Einstein Search Answers. So this finds the most relevant content from your knowledge articles in response to a query in the global search bar, an experience site, or as shown in the green screen grab here in the knowledge sidebar on the right hand side where the highlights are. So the question is shown in the first highlight, which is 401k equity options, obviously quite American. The article snippet appears in the search results, and then the second highlight is the usual thumbs up, thumbs down as soon as generative AI is involved. In this case, the search answers is using generative AI to create a summary of the relevant information from your articles and present those to the agent. It's always worth doing the thumbs up, thumbs down, because that can be used to refine prompts and models in the future. So always let Salesforce know whether you found that useful or not. Moving on to analytics, and a steampunk dashboard there I'm particularly proud of. So you can now share folders directly from the Analytics tab by choosing Share from the row level action, which will open the sharing dialog shown here. Then you choose the user, the role, or the group, what level of access you want them to have, and then you save those changes. You can also select more than one item from the Analytics tab to carry out an action on. So at the moment, you can see here, I've selected a couple of my channel marketing, channel management dashboards. When I do manage items, that comes up with an action which apply to both of those. At the moment, I'm only seeing change owner, so I'm guessing that's the only action that's available at the moment, but I'm sure more will be coming in future releases. A few other changes to Lightning reports and dashboards. As we saw in the previous screenshot, you can transfer ownership of dashboards either individually or in bulk. Dashboard components have been renamed to widgets. I'd imagine this is to bring them in line with Tableau and, in all fairness, lots of other dashboarding type solutions. And the rich text and image widgets that were previously only available in unlimited performance editions are now available to everyone. So you can put some nice images and some text that is unrelated necessarily to the data that you're showing in your dashboard, and have those just enrich and improve the user experience. And you can now have up to 25 widgets per dashboard, which is an increase from 20 in Winter 24. And this includes up to 20 charts and tables, 2 images, and 25 rich text. Although note, if you use 25 rich text, you won't be able to put anything else on there because you'll have consumed your entire allowance. A few more changes in analytics. You can have up to 5 filters in a dashboard without needing unlimited and performance edition these days. And this is up from 3 that was available for enterprise and lower in Winter 24. We've got a couple of features to add parity to classic. You can change the field in a Lightning report filter without having to delete it and create a new one. And you can also select and move more than one column at the same time, also known as bulk move columns. And when you're searching for particular report types, you can search for a specific object or field if you have unlimited or performance edition. And I would say what we've seen in the last couple of releases is things have unlimited and performance first, and then they become available for enterprise a little bit later. I guess that's one way of limiting the number of people that will use it without leaving it in beta. So up to 20 objects and fields are allowed, but these can't be lookup or composite fields like address. And finally, a couple of things on CRM analytics. Dashboard query results are now cached, which should allow dashboards to load faster with fewer round trips to the server. And you can now include metadata when downloading a lens or a widget. you have to choose the snappily named, there's a real theme in this release of snappily named features that you'll never forget. So this is download an Excel format with metadata option. You'll never forget that. And the metadata includes username, date time of download, widget and lens titles, query groups, filters, and the record type, record count rather. So everything that was involved in that widget or lens. Moving on to customization, where I intentionally use the American spelling because that's what you find in the release notes, and then we've got an American custom car there, so that all dovetails nicely. So first up in this section, dynamic forms in the Lightning App Builder. Very excited about this one. You can now add related object fields traversing up to 2 levels into your Lightning App Builder pages. So note that this can't be via polymorphic relationships, so you can't use things that, ownership where it could be user or queue, you can't follow that, but for an awful lot of relationships you can follow. And what this means is you can do something like this screen grab here, where we've got a bunch of information from the contact, bunch of information from the related account, but crucially I haven't had to burn a load of formula fields in order to be able to pull that information through onto the record purely for the purposes of displaying it. So I think once this is GA and you're used to it and you've got your new page layout sorted, you may find yourself being able to retire some formula fields and get some space back in that area. You can now set visibility, field visibility by device, which again I think is a really good feature because it's really useful to be able to show a reduced number of fields when a user's accessing via a mobile device. Just show them a few headline fields, and then when they're on their desktop, show them chapter and verse. Something I've been personally asking for a few years now. Whenever I saw any Salesforce product managers give us a way to do this. Dynamic forms are auto-enabled for mobile in new orgs created from now on, and all dynamic field forms now have an additional property of the object, which will include relationship information if it's not the main object. And the API name will help you to distinguish similarly named fields, because I'm sure that we're not the only org which has several things with the same name on it. So we've got one person saying they can't hear anything. I'm guessing that's the only person. So that sounds like it. I'm talking and I'm guessing everyone else can hear me, because there are loads and loads of questions saying they can't hear anything. So that sounds like it might be a local problem to your machine, I'm afraid. Yep, so I've got an all good from someone else, so it sounds like it's a local problem. Sorry, probably can't help you there, I'm afraid. Okay, so moving on with the Lightning App Builder. Dynamic actions for standard objects on mobile are now generally available. They've been available on desktop for a little while. So you assign these actions outside of the page layout, and you can apply filters to decide who sees them and when. So that's really quite cool. You can have actions which are only available to particular profiles, to specific people. If you use the phone preview option, you'll be able to see what your mobile actions on record pages look like before you make them available to your users on their mobile devices. And where this is really useful is some actions aren't available on mobile devices. So it's nice if you know that before the user knows that. And finally, there's a new Omni Supervisor page type, which lets you create your own tabs for supervisors. Sharing next. So org-wide default changes, if you're doing this a lot, if you're making org-wide default changes and you've got a large number of parent accounts, person accounts, or associated portal accounts, they will now process quicker. Sadly, we don't have any metrics for that, but should be faster. And you can monitor the progress of these changes via the background jobs page. And this is another one that's being applied on a rolling basis when the release goes live. So if you're doing this regularly, you might have to continue with the current speed, and then you'll see it suddenly get faster. And there's an update being applied with this release that slightly changes how account sharing works in order to speed up sharing recalculations. So instead of storing share records for opportunities that the account implicitly grants access to, so when you get access to an account, you also get access to opportunities, the platform is going to move to determine at the point of access if you're allowed to have that, rather than storing a record that can be retrieved. So it will do just-in-time calculation, essentially not putting in that kind of effort and not storing information until it has to. I'm guessing this is more efficient than having loads of shares that never get looked at. But the key thing is, if you have code that is querying for these records, they're going to start returning empty results in Spring 24. Again, this is being applied on a rolling basis. And if that wonderful explanation wasn't enough for you, then you can read more at the short link shown there. As usual, we'll be sending out the slide deck, so you don't need to worry about capturing that now. And then we have a couple more changes in the customization arena. So now you can't delete a permission set if that is assigned to users, even if the assignment is through a permission set group. Instead, you'll receive an error. So this wasn't blocked before, which means that users could end up with groups assigned to them that actually conferred no additional permissions because they'd all been deleted. So now that won't be allowed. And you now need the view roles and role hierarchy permission to be able to share a public list with roles. And the reason for that is that action shows the roles that are available in your org, which might be confidential information. This is a release update, which is available in Spring 24. It will be enforced in Winter 25, so 8 months away. So if you want to use that, start testing it now. Just noticed we've got another question. Just going to go and look at that. Yep. Okay, excellent. Well done, Sarah. So we're sorted on the sound. That's even better. Right, my favourite topic of development with a rather Heath Robinson looking machine here. So Lightning Web Components first. This isn't something that's actually changed in this release. I just think it's important, so I'm reminding everyone of it, that component level versioning now applies and has done since API 58. So the component behavior will match the API version you specify in the meta XML config file. If you go with anything earlier than 58, it will apply 58, and anything after the current API will equate to the current release until that next release goes live, when it will suddenly flip to the new behavior, which might not be what you want. So always use the actual release that you're interested in rather than one which might be coming down the line. Empty comment nodes, which were generated by some empty text nodes, which were generated by some LWC features, have been replaced with empty comment nodes, which may break, basically, if your UI tests are relying on the specific markup that's generated under the hood. So as an example, this is just an LWC if that decides whether to output a welcome message if the show welcome property is true. So what used to happen was you'd just see the welcome in quote marks if that decided that it needed to render it. Now it'll be surrounded by empty comments, which I'm guessing means that Salesforce can more easily locate those parts of the page. But if you're relying on it being just a string with welcome in it, then your tests may break. Always a good idea to try and avoid relying on the underlying markup if you possibly can. If you have LWC classes that don't extend Lightning element, you used to be able to put decorators in them, which weren't supported, so they didn't actually do anything. But come API 60 onwards, if you set that in your meta XML, they're going to start erroring. So you want to remove those. The LWC workspace API is now generally available. So you can now manage tabs and subtabs in Lightning console apps using LWC. But please note, this requires Lightning Web Security to be enabled, and that is different to the Locker service. So you may wish to verify that that doesn't give you any issues if you're thinking about turning it on. And the Lightning Record Picker component is generally available, which allows you to search and retrieve up to 100 records and then carry out some further action on them. So in Apex, we have a new null coalescing operator. This is something that lots of other programming languages have, and now we Salesforce developers do too. So this is a double question mark operator, and essentially what it does is it evaluates the left-hand operator, and if that is null, it then evaluates the left-hand operand, and then if that is null, evaluates the right-hand operand. So it will use the left hand, but if that is null, it will automatically use the right hand, as long as both operands are the same type, otherwise you'll get an error. But what that means is, rather than having to have code like this, which is explicitly checking for a null and then taking additional action with all the kind of appropriate indentation and braces, you can turn that into a single line where the compiler does most of the work for you, or the platform does most of the work for you. And what will happen here is if contacts for account.getAccountID returns non-null, that'll be used. Otherwise, it'll automatically create a new list and use that instead. So a single line, much clearer code in this particular instance. Also note you can't use this in SOCL bind expressions. You have to evaluate it outside of the SOCL bind expression, and then use it there. Also for Apex, for those who like their universally unique identifiers, the UUID class generates version 4 of these, which are cryptographically strong, pseudo-random, 32-character hexadecimal string. The key thing is collisions are highly unlikely because they are genuinely fairly random. So they're ideal when you need uniqueness and also where unpredictability is important. If you need context, if you need some information, you've maybe got a pool of them that come out of a particular namespace, then you'd use UUID3 because that has that kind of concept and sets aside a certain number of characters for where it came from. Flow Builder next. There is a new action to send information to Data Cloud. You'll need to create and configure your Data Cloud ingester API connectors in Data Cloud first. And when you do that, you'll then find a unique invocable action for each ingester schema in your Flow Builder. If you have an HTTP callout in your flow, you can choose the connect for schema option, and then basically configure the callout based on the response you receive, so you don't have to worry about manually configuring it or pasting anything in. You can just work off what you actually get, assuming you can get it without any issues. And there are more reactive components that can respond to changes in other components: display text, long text, and text template, all quite texty, I'm sure you'll agree. Continuing with Flow Builder, there's more input validation support, including name, address, and data table. And you can provide error messages as part of that validation to help the users fix the issues. And you can also choose which user to execute event-triggered flows as, either the user that triggered a flow or the org's default workflow user. So note that if you choose the default workflow user, any record changes that you make in your flow will be recorded against that user rather than the user that actually triggered the flow. And even more on Flow Builder, so you can see where the investment goes these days. You can now save incomplete flows, which is really quite useful. I don't know how anyone managed to build complex flows if they couldn't save them when they were partway through and come back to them. So what you'll see now is just review these issues. These issues prevent activation, but they don't prevent saving, whereas before you used to get an error and you couldn't save them, you had to complete. So note, screens and actions still need to be fully configured, but other elements don't. And you can also consume predictions or scoring from AI models. Not the greatest screenshot, but this is basically showing an action that invokes the model's endpoint. So depending on what models you've got configured, you'll see particular actions around Data Cloud. You can now debug Data Cloud triggered flows by choosing a record as the triggering record when starting a debug session. When you search in a data table and choose a record, that selection will be retained even if you search again. You actually need to go in and physically deselect the record, clear the value in order to clear your selection. And you can view error information for segment triggered flows. You choose the specific flow version and occurrence page to see these details. The Migrate to Flow tool now supports partial migration for most actions, with the exception of invocable actions. And once the migration is complete, if anything needs further work, further attention from you in Flow Builder, you'll see them in the needs review section. If you're an ISV, then Migrate to Flow can also delete workflow rules from managed packages nowadays, so that becomes a bit more useful. And you can now see flows that contain email alerts. So in the email alert setup page, there's a new related list for each email alert, which is basically flows using these email alerts. So you don't look in the flow and then access it from that. You look in the email alert and you can see which flows are hooked into it. There is now no limit to the number of paused or waiting flow interviews you can have in your instance, but they do still consume storage. So there is effectively a limit, which is when you run out of storage. Flows launched from Apex will respect sharing rules if the Apex class declares with sharing. So essentially, the flow is inheriting the Apex sharing declaration. This is another release update that will be enforced in Winter 25. Reminder that Winter 25 is October of this year. And another release update that will be enforced in winter 25 is restricting user access to run flows. So they'll need to be given explicit access through profiles or permission sets rather than just being able to access things. And this deprecates the flow sites license if you've been making use of that. I couldn't actually find out very much about where you might be using that, so I can't offer any further guidance. Flow orchestration next. Orchestrations with API 60 onwards can specify the user that background or MuleSoft steps run as, and this will default to the automated process user. And as you can see, there's a bunch of new custom report types for orchestration. Something worth mentioning is these won't be added to your org if you're at the little known custom report type limit, which is 200 for enterprise and 2000 for unlimited and performance editions. Back to snappily named features. If you find your users are being flooded with emails when they're getting work items assigned or reassigned to them as part of an orchestration, you can disable this through the stop sending orchestration work item default email notification setting, which does exactly what it says on the tin, because it says the entirety of everything it could possibly do. When debugging an orchestration, you can now see variable values in the details, which should make it a lot easier to find out what's going on. And when you save an orchestration, you'll get a new warning pretty much every time, reminding you that it is a consumption licensed product. There's always a story behind these changes, so I'd imagine somebody ended up with a big bill that they were reluctant to pay at some point in time, and this is making it crystal clear that when you do this, it is going to end up costing you some more money. Next up, we have some identity changes. There's a new version of the Salesforce Authenticator app coming in March, which is less than a month away. I'm mentioning it now because when it does become available, you want to get on it, because you'll have 3 months before it's the only one that will work when the summer 24 release goes live in June. So you need to make sure you can live with that. If you need to revert to one-time codes in Authenticator, so you can't use the kind of push authentication concept, the good news is it'll take less clicks and time now. And if there's a service issue, you'll be automatically redirected there, which sounds great. And if you click the having trouble link, you'll be taken straight to it without being bothered with any more buttons or to press or having to give any more information. The Authenticator is disabled for external users, which is those that are accessing Salesforce via an experience, also known as a community, for orgs from spring 24 onwards. This is to help with availability of Authenticator for internal users. So it sounds like it's been a bit too successful in terms of external users, and a few million of those have started using it. And another snappily named setting, the terminate all of a user's sessions when an admin resets that user's password. Guess what? That can be used to terminate all of a user session when you reset the password. And you'd use this, all joking aside, you'd use this if there was a concern that a user's password might have been exposed, it might have appeared on the dark web. So essentially, you've reset it and you've kicked out anyone who might have used that to log, might have a current session who's used that to log in. And you know, any user, if you're resetting their password on their behalf, should be fine with that as well. Next up, we have Experience Cloud. Aura and Lightning Web Lightning Web runtime sites now have a change history panel in the Experience Builder. Currently, this shows when it was published and changes to the domain configuration, but hopefully there'll be more added to that. I'm kind of not sure how pleased I am to see this, as it really looks like something else I'll have to audit for information security purposes, but we shall see. There are now 40 languages supported in Aura and Lightning Web runtime sites, up from 25. You can create custom URLs for your custom object pages to help with search engine optimization, so you can have more descriptive names in there rather than 18-character IDs and the like, or underscores and all that good stuff. Generative AI makes it into Experience Cloud, as partners can use this to draft emails, but note that this is for Aura sites only. And you can define site-specific spacing as shown in the screen grab here. Expression-based component variations are now GA in Lightning Web runtime sites. So what this means is you can create several versions of the same component and then set up some visibility rules to decide who sees a particular version. And if your rules overlap, you can prioritize and say which one should be considered when multiple rules apply. There's a new tab layout component with improved performance, but if you aren't ready to upgrade yet, the existing one will still work fine. You can use the enhanced list view in Aura sites. So this gives your partners access to the contacts and leads insights style list views that we've talked about in previous releases. And with dynamic URL redirects in Lightning Web Runtime sites, you can now send users to sites hosted on non-Salesforce domains and use query parameters on both the source and the target URL. Moving on to mobile, what a particularly fine device that is. Device requirements, this is Android 9 or higher, iOS 15 or higher. Salesforce have a specific set of devices that they use for testing, which is at the short link shown here. You can navigate to that and see what they actually use. So you're free to use any device that matches the requirements, but Salesforce may not be able to replicate the bugs that you find, or any bugs that you find, should you find any, which means also they won't be able to fix them. It's also subject to change without notice, which does beg the question how useful going and looking at that is, because it could have changed by the time you encounter any kind of an issue. You can now create CRM analytics dashboard views on your mobile device and switch between save views. I mentioned earlier the phone preview for Lightning App Builder record pages. So that will show you what it looks like, what's not available, if there is anything that's not available on mobile. And finally, again, as mentioned earlier, dynamic action supports for standard objects on mobile. Next, we have Sales Cloud. Einstein Sales Emails. These are a generative AI feature in Sales Cloud. So when creating an email, you can click the Draft with Einstein button, as shown with the one, which allows the AI to create the email for you, and then you can tweak and send. You can also add product information for the AI to include in the response, and pick what or who this email is going to be related to in order to personalize it further or include additional information. But note, this is generative AI, you must check the response, make sure you're happy with it before clicking send. So for example, if it's a request for a meeting, using that standard prompt, you'll find a placeholder where you add the meeting date time, and that'd be quite embarrassing if that went out as is. Call Explorer, another generative AI feature. Open a voice or video call record, and then you can ask natural language questions that the AI will respond to. Note that you can only ask one question at a time, so I'm guessing that's keeping the prompt size down and keeping the response size down so it doesn't consume too many tokens in one go. Call Explorer is powered by Einstein Conversation Insights. So there's a few more enhancements in this area. So call summaries now support additional languages, English, French, German, Italian, Japanese, and Spanish. That's, I think, the additional languages that are supported by OpenAI these days. So everywhere else that actually hooks into OpenAI, you'll see those languages again. Microsoft Teams and Google Meet are now supported, but your users do need to be able to connect their accounts to Salesforce to make use of this, which may not be possible depending on how things are secured in your organization. You can add participants to call records, so you can relate a call to a user, lead, or contact, and you can assign a specific speaker to a speaking track so that when you then look at the call, you know who is speaking when. And if you've got Enterprise Edition, like we have, you'll get 10 Einstein Conversation Insights licenses as part of this release to use as you see fit. So that's a nice little treat from Salesforce, nice little late Christmas present. And there's a new page to see metrics around Conversation Insights, including what licenses are assigned, connected video accounts. So the license usage, connection status, the license usage section, which we can just see here, ECI license usage, that shows the number of assigned and available licenses, and the video account status shows active, inactive, in need of attention users. So active means they've got one connection and no error state. Inactive, everything's disconnected or turned off rather. Those in an error state, with an error state, are in the needs attention category. And the user status tab shows users with connected video accounts and their status, so a slightly different view on much the same information. Seller Home is the new homepage for sales team members. So this shows them an overview of things like opportunities, accounts, leads, contacts, their day's agenda. Also allows them to set and track their goals, which I would have thought would be quite useful to a lot of sales users. View their to-do items, see recent records, contact suggestions from Einstein, so lots of stuff that can go in there. So this is the new default homepage for Sales, Sales Console, and Sales Engagement apps. However, if you've applied a custom homepage to any of these apps already, or you've applied an all default custom homepage, again, like we have, you won't see it automatically. In that case, you'll need to manually enable in setup to make that the homepage for those particular apps. Pipeline inspection next. All metrics, list views, and charts now have a record limit of 2,000. Previously, it was either 1 or 2,000, which led to confusion and not a little disappointment. Filter logic is now available, so you can use the and, the or, and the not operators. So previously, records had to match all criteria, which essentially meant that they were all ANDed together, and now you've got a bit more control over that. And a couple of UI improvements. So as you resize your screen, metrics and quick filters now scale down and move into overflow menus with little carrots and telling you how many more there are. And on the charts tab, there's a nice little sash type widget that allows you to give more space to the chart or list as you desire, or flip between them. You can create your own forecast groups for forecast types that you create after the Spring 24 release goes live. So based on the industry or type of sale, for example, they still have to be based on opportunity or opportunity product objects, but you can continue to forecast using product family as you do now. And adjustment values now appear in separate columns on the forecast page rather than only in the hover window. So you can see the original value, the after team adjustments, and the after manager adjustments to get an accurate visibility of your forecast. It does need configuration in setup where you will need to choose to show the adjustments of columns, but what you can do in setup as well is rename them to fit your business process. And sticking with collaborative forecasts, if you have multiple active forecasts, users can now choose to present these in tabs. So they go into the gear icon on the forecast page, and they'll see this select forecast to show as tabs. They choose which ones they want, then they show in the header and allow them to quickly flip between them. Collaborative forecast charts have some improvements. You'll see there's the numbers against them. So you still open them by clicking charts shown with a 1. You then choose which chart from the drop-down marked with a 2 you want to be looking at. Forecasts that are grouped by product family or custom pick list, you can choose the specific 1 via the drop-down marked with a 3. The checkbox marked with a 4 allows you to choose to view with or without adjustments. And you can see data in the table below the chart marked with a 5. Next up, we have Service Cloud. Again, starting with some generative AI enhancements. So additional language support for work summaries and service applies. Will look a bit familiar, some of those languages. This actually became available on December the 15th, so it's been out for close to 2 months now. Conversation mining is generally available. This allows you to transform conversation data into service insights and build bot intents. But note that you need at least 2,500 records with an identifiable contact reason, so it may not be for everybody. And you can now see the knowledge article that was used to draft a ground service reply via the knowledge link in the recommended reply as shown by the upper orange box here in the screen grab. And I should point out the reason things like the additional language support became available in December 15th is because the generative AI features, because everything's moving so fast and because lots of things are being added quickly, that's actually in its own release cycle, so that tends to be updated once a month. And we just call out some of the bigger ones when we do the actual release webinars. What's next? The cross-lingual intent model now has support for 19 languages, so that's clearly not an OpenAI thing. And it can be trained on 1 utterance per language per intent, so you don't need an awful lot of training data for this. And you can also test a new language without having to rebuild the model to introduce it. You can send dynamic file content using an enhanced bot, but you do have to create that file via Apex or a flow. And you can now run flows in the context of the bot user rather than the system user. So this is a release update that was being forced in summer 24. So again, not long, not far away, 4 months. but if this is something you're going to be using, then make sure to test in a sandbox first. Email a case next. The email body limit has been increased to the size, maximum large or rich area text size. You might recognize that as 131,072 characters, up from 32,000. You can choose how lightning threading is applied of email to case and the replies. You can use tokens, you can use metadata from headers, or you can combine both of those. There's a couple of new things in the user interface, in APIs rather. The email message is now available in the user interface API, and the email routing address field on the email message object is now exposed through the S-Object API. So if you're making programmatic use of those, you've just got a couple more things you can use. Einstein work summaries provide AI-generated summaries of voice calls. So another generative AI feature, and enhanced messaging sessions. So for each conversation, Einstein outputs the summary, the issue, and the resolution. So you need to set this up if you want to use it. So you go into setup and enable work summaries, as shown with the 1, and then you map the outputs to fields on a Salesforce object as marked with a 2, and then you activate summaries for the service channel marked with a 3, and then you're good to go. Knowledge next, the knowledge effectiveness dashboard. Anyone want to guess what that does? No prizes. It allows you to measure the effectiveness of your knowledge base, but it does also provide some recommendations to increase return on investment. So that it is worth looking at. And there are some additional authorized video sites that you can use in the HTML editor now. I won't list them all, but you used to get an error, and now you don't. So this brings us to the end of the generally available features. So now we're going to take a look at things that are coming down the pipe in terms of betas and previews. So please bear in mind these features may never go live. And it's a real bumper crop, this release as well. I think a lot of the best features are currently in beta or preview. So Lightning Web Component mixed shadow mode. So back when Salesforce launched Lightning Web Components, they created a polyfill for the shadow DOM called synthetic shadow mode to allow older browsers to work with LWC, even if they didn't support the underlying technology. The landscape's now changed. Most modern browsers support native shadow DOM. So you can basically indicate that in your LWC using the shadow support mode property. You can set that to native, and then everything that's going to use that knows that that does support native, and we don't need to worry about these synthetic shadow DOM there. So this will apply to child components as well. So if you've wrapped some other components and they don't support native, then that may break. And we're also advised not to use this with base Lightning components. Native components are up to 50% faster, Salesforce say, so you probably want to be doing this. And if you're a developer, here's how you indicate you support native shadow mode. Scratchable snapshots are in beta in Spring 24, and I'm a really big fan of this. So essentially, these are point-in-time copies of a scratch org, which include the packages you've installed into it, the metadata configuration you've made either by deploying or by changing manually, and any data that you've added to it. So you can effectively snapshot that whole lot and then use that to stamp out new scratch orgs with exactly the same contents. Now you do have to enable this in your Dev Hub, and you do have to use CLI commands in order to manage the snapshots. So you need to be comfortable with the CLI. Also note that snapshots only last for 30 days. So you've got a couple of choices there, really. You can either be creating snapshots on a regular basis as part of your continuous integration with the latest information in there, or you need to get into a bit of a loop that when it's coming up for time to for a snapshot to expire, you create a scratch org from it, and then you create a new new snapshot from that scratch org, and then you're good to go for another 30 days. So all achievable, and if you really want to keep an old version and a snapshot around for months on end, I can't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to do that. I mentioned I'm a big fan. I've been playing with this. It works in preview, and I've written a blog post about it with my thoughts, so you can find that at the short link shown. Another beta feature that I'm a big fan of, because I've done this manually a number of times in the past, is the flow repeater. And the fact that the flow repeater is in beta is particularly nice, I think. Just flows off the tongue. So this allows a user to fill in details for a record, and then there's a button of add underneath it where you can basically just duplicate the form, do that as many times as you want, and add as many records as you want in a single screen without me having to write loads of code that does that. So that's going to allow me to retire a bunch of code, I'm fairly sure. So the way this works is the details that have been entered will be stored in a collection, passed back to you from that component, and you'll then iterate those. Zip handling in Apex. This is in developer preview rather than beta, but that really doesn't detract from its awesomeness. So this introduces a new compression namespace, and that allows you to create compressed zip files, specifying the level of compression and the method you want to use to compress, and also extracting files from a compressed file without having to expand the entirety of it, which is no mean feat. So again, for the developers, this is what the code looks like to create a zip file. And there's the file that was created when I executed it in my preview org. Again, all works in preview, which is really nice. Extracting a file is similarly straightforward. And when I dumped it out into the debug log, it looked exactly like the file I'd created in the first slide. So that was great. So this is something that's in developer preview. There's a couple of features like this. And the reason for that is that it's just easier for it to be unwound if anything needs to be changed. And I think this one is actually, in this release, the developer preview in Scratch orgs. So the idea is that after 30 days, although potentially not with snapshots, but after 30 days, essentially everything that was using that particular version of it is now gone, and an updated version can be deployed. So I think we're likely to see more of this kind of stuff being done, more of this getting access to things early. Another great developer preview, evaluation of dynamic formulas in Apex. So another new namespace, formula eval. You build the formula and then you evaluate it against a record rather than going back to the database. And you can access global variables, you can define whether empty numerics should be treated as nulls or zeros, all the kind of things that you normally do with a formula. But where it really scores for me is you don't actually need an S-object record. You can evaluate this against an Apex object, against an instance of an Apex class, which is what I have here in this example. So I've got my init cap, and the reason I've chosen init cap is that as a formula which isn't available in Apex, so I would have to write some code to achieve that. And what it does, it capitalizes the first letter of every word in a string. So I've got an inner class that wraps a string, my string carrier, and I create an instance of this, and I give it some text and capitals that are all over the place. So then build my formula using the initCap formula function, passing it my candidate. And then the final line you can see there is I do initCap formula.evaluate and I pass in SC, which is my record instance. So basically, here is some text with capitals all over the place. I give that to this. And when I execute this in my preview, it comes out with the first words nicely capitalized. So if there's a formula which you really want but isn't easily achievable in Apex, you don't want to write a whole bunch of code for it, this is a really good way of being able to gain access to that from Apex. Yeah, so you won't have to replicate things, you can just use it directly, or you will be able to, assuming this feature makes it out of preview, because as we know, never guaranteed that that's going to happen. And that brings us to the end of the key new features in this release. So thank you very much for your attention. I realise it's been quite a long one this time, but actually this was a good release with a number of nice features in it, which is slightly unusual for spring. Winter's normally the one that gets most of the love these days. As always, Salesforce have a release readiness portal, a trailhead badge, and a vast amount, about 600 pages of release notes for you to pore over if you like that kind of thing. So again, thank you very much for your attention. Looks like we might have a question or two, so I'm just going to have a look in there and see what we have. I've not answered. If the implicit sharing for opportunity records is not stored, then how will it work? Will the implicit calculation be dynamic? It will. When you try and access opportunities, it will go and look at the sharing that's in place. And if you have had the account shared with you, then it will at that point in time allow you access. So it's not storing anything, it's just figuring out on the fly. So I'm guessing the overhead of storing all those records and managing those records got to the point where it was better to do it further down the line. Is there a charge for Einstein sales emails? There isn't at the moment. If you are, but you have to be using unlimited edition. So there's a $0 SKU that you can request from your AE. At the moment, and that I think that gives you 8,000 credits. You can then buy more credits. I'm sure there will be a charge once it's shaken out a bit. Design style sales need a separate license purchase. You need to be on a limited edition, then talk to your AE. Last time I looked, it was a $0 SKU, so there was no, at the moment, additional charge to it. I think that will happen as soon as it's bedded in and they identified the value. Probably when you can do custom prompts, because at the moment it's fairly limited in terms of what you can do. Do you know if the compression allows folders? Yeah, it does. It does. I have played around with that. You give it the location on disk. I think it went down into that. So that was cool. Hoping to hear something about the connection between Service Cloud and Marketing Cloud. In particular, say marketing messages can be sent via WhatsApp and receive a reply. No, we didn't mention that. That isn't something that we have a lot of our customers using, so I have to make some judgments about what is appropriate to include and what isn't appropriate to include. If that's something you need assistance with, then I would, if you contact BrightGen Sales, I'm sure they'll be able to find someone to help you with that. Cool. That looks like we've come to the end of the questions. After this is great because, like, normally I get 1 or no questions, and I've just had about 9 or 10. So that was really good. So thanks again, everyone, for your attention. Hopefully, see you at the next webinar, which will be in June of this year. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.